If you find yourself watching this video, then you likely have a narcissist in your life. Now, it's really difficult to tell the difference sometimes between narcissistic personality disorder and someone with narcissistic characteristics. Reality is, all of us have some narcissistic characteristics. It's part of being human. And so it's important to note the difference between someone who actually has the disorder, the personality disorder, versus just the characteristics. And the way that you approach these people would be different. My name is Monica Maurer. I am a licensed professional counselor, and I'm also the director of the Center for Transformation. The Center for Transformation exists to help you create connection in this lonely and disconnected world. And narcissism is a problem in our world. I heard recently that divorce lawyers are often saying, yeah, everybody thinks they're married to a narcissist. Yeah, we've heard that before. Oh, you were married to a narcissist? Yeah, so was everyone else. But some people are actually married to people or work with or have children who are, or parents who actually have the personality disorder. And in this episode, we are going to cover what it looks like to tell the difference between the personality disorder and the actual just characteristics, and how to handle each of those in order to produce change. There are some things that can produce change in people's lives who have this disorder or who have some of those characteristics. So in the past, I've been a therapist for a couple of decades now, and I've been to tons of trainings over the years. And what's happened at a lot of the trainings and a lot of the books I've read, I've heard it said over the years, if you're married to a narcissist or if you're in relationship with a narcissist, just forget it, just leave. It's hopeless. There's nothing you can do about it. I always found that very just a sinking feeling and a difficulty with that concept of it being so hopeless. Like, what does this mean for these people who have these characteristics? It just means that they're just left to themselves and nobody can get along with them, and they're hopeless, and the situation with them is hopeless. Or sometimes, I think people find themselves stuck in these relationships. You might be, have a parent who is a narcissist and you can't really get away from them, or a spouse, and it would be too hard to actually divorce them, and so you end up having to be in this space. So what does that mean for these situations? That there's nothing we can do? And over the years, I've started to discover through reading, through experiencing this kind of personality and these kinds of characteristics in my counseling room and in my own relationships, I realized, there are some things you can do. It just takes a lot of growth and strength and wisdom and courage to be able to do that. But there is a learning curve, and it can be done. So when you think about narcissism, there's a few key things to consider. Narcissism isn't arrogance. Sometimes there is arrogance involved, but that's not what narcissism is. Narcissism is actually severe insecurity. It's a depth of a lack of a solid sense of self that then leads to some behaviors that look either very, very big, so it can be arrogant and intense, or minimizing or self-deprecating themselves. But it really has more to do with this deep sense of insecurity that cannot receive any feedback. No criticism, no feedback, no critical response, because that there's no foundation of self that could actually manage any type of input that would result in self-inquiry, self-understanding, any type of feedback that would produce an ability to look at yourself and make some changes. So that really is the key factor with narcissism. And when you consider the personality disorder, it is where this situation is so severe that any feedback elicits a very intense response. And the response will either be like this this attacking others response. So if you give any critical feedback or response to that person, their immediate response is going to blame you. Like, I'm mad at you. You say you're mad at me, but I actually have more justification to be mad at you. You're really the problem. And so it's that defense mechanism that personality characteristic has built up in order to bounce off any criticism, because their psyche cannot manage that criticism. Or that person would take on the criticism and take it on so deeply that they self-deprecate and put on a show, and say something like, yeah, well, I'm just the worst of all humans. I'm just a terrible person. I'm a terrible mother. I'm a terrible father. I'm a terrible spouse. I'm, a terrible employee. I'm the worst, and you have a reason to not like me. And the self-deprecation will continue and continue and continue until the person who has offered the feedback or criticism is offering to take it back, right? And say, no, that's not true. Well, you're not that bad, that kind of a thing. And so that is the defense mechanism that the subconscious mind of this narcissistic person is putting up in order to push back the criticism, because there is no capability for someone with a personality disorder to actually input it. I've actually seen it happen where I think of it like a spectrum from blaming all the way over to blaming others to blaming self, like attacking and ridiculing and coming against someone else, where on the other side is blaming and shaming and putting all the onus on another person. And so what we see is someone with narcissism can fluctuate back and forth between the two spectrums, versus coming into the middle and saying, hey, you know what, I can see what you're saying. I do have some issues. I do have some things about myself that are, I can see, I can have some self-awareness and input information and actually shift and change my narrative about myself, or the way I see myself, or the way I see my behaviors, so that I can be a more helpful, productive, life-giving relationship for you. So someone who's healthy has this sense of self-awareness, but someone who has extreme levels of narcissism has no self-awareness, no ability to receive feedback, become self-aware, make changes by digesting or metabolizing the information that's offered to them. I'll oftentimes use this analogy in therapy. I'll say, okay, example, somebody with narcissism would be like picking their nose in public, and everybody around them would be saying, oh, that's so gross, you shouldn't do that in public. And the person with narcissism would say, you shouldn't be looking at me then, right? Like that's your problem. So I think in our culture, we think of a lot of people as narcissists because, they talk about themselves incessantly, or they're very prideful or arrogant about different things. But the real test is, if you give them feedback, can they handle it? If you give them feedback, are they able to digest the information and input it in another way? And so I'm just thinking, in my own life, of people that I've been in acquaintance with, even family members, where there's a sense of a real lack of self-awareness. And when you try to sit down with the person and say, hey, this is how this affected me, they may even act like, I'm thinking one relationship in particular, with a past employer, where I would sit down with the person and say, hey, this is what I've gone through. This is what I'm experiencing here. I can see how there's something going on with me. And this is how some of your behaviors have impacted me. And the person would just kind of think about the information, but then really kind of push it back on me. And to the point where, after a while of me trying to go to this person and have these conversations, there was such a pushback that they would kind of roll their eyes and go, oh, one of these conversations again. And so instead of looking at our conversations as a way of growth and enhancing our relationship, deepening our relationship through healthy conflict and back and forth, which every relationship has to have, there was a sense of, this is exhausting. I don't want to do this anymore. This doesn't really matter to me. You don't really matter to me, and I'm not going to take it into consideration. And the proof was in the pudding, so to speak, in that the change never did happen, and that relationship continued to be the same, as well as across the board in other relationships. I could see that personality remained the same rather than growing and changing, which is really what we want to see in these relationships. And so when we think about change in these dynamics, really what we're looking to do is consistently and persistently provide a healthy sense of conflict and confrontation. I know as a therapist in the past, when I first started, I was in my mid-20s and I was pretty insecure in a sense of not as sure of myself, and I would have someone with a really strong personality come in to my office and feel very intimidated by that personality. And over time, and as I studied narcissism, I began to understand that it's very important for me as a therapist to have a dominance in the way that I present myself, whether that's with a strong tone of voice or a strong, secure body posture, but also a sense of what I'm saying, really believing in what I'm saying, and really having a strong sense of authority with my voice, not in an arrogant way, but in a self-confident way, a self-assured way. We can be self-assured and humble. We can be arrogant and actually insecure. So it's this dichotomy of these two seemingly opposite things, but reality is arrogance is not confidence, it's insecurity. And so as a therapist, it was my goal to become a strong, dominant mind, but in a gentle, protector, humble type of way, where I'm open to feedback and discussion, but I'm also owning my own narrative and self-assured, so that when someone with a dominant personality, whether they have the narcissistic characteristics or something else going on, comes into my space, I'm not easily intimidated, and I'm able to kind of go toe to toe, so to speak, in a healthy confrontational kind of way in order to produce change. And what I've found is that's not only been helpful in the therapeutic office, but it's also been very helpful in my personal relationships, as well as friendships and community experiences and relationships, in that I can hold a confidence, a humble, caring, gentle confidence, and come into space in my relationships and really confront these narcissistic tendencies and characteristics in others. And it also helps to confront the narcissistic tendencies in myself as well, because we all have these characteristics. If we don't think we do, then we actually have more of the characteristics than we would consider. If you're pushing back right now and like, well, I don't have any narcissistic characteristics, then watch out, you probably do. And so this is really something to consider, and consider, first of all, how can I become a more strong, dominant mind? Instead of talking with a weak voice and just, timid and insecure, have a strong, confident voice in the way that you carry yourself, shoulders back, head up, strong, confident voice tone. Even I tell people, practice in the mirror, and also just owning what you're saying, having a strong opinion. I really like the scripture that says, don't be wise in your own opinion, right? Because that speaks to, I've got it all figured out. I'm a know-it-all. I think I have everything under wraps, and I know what I'm talking about, and you don't, kind of thing. Versus, hey, I've thought through this. I have a strong opinion. I can own my own narrative, is a statement I like to say. Yet, I can go toe to toe and hear what you have to say, take that into perspective, and then weigh it out and really come up with what I think and what I believe. And this is kind of what makes the world go round, that we all have a variety of beliefs and that we come to the table and go back and forth in decision making and opinion creating for each of us, and that we don't just throw people out when they don't have our same opinion or think the same way that we do. We don't go into enemy mode, into combat and conflict when we don't agree. So when it comes to somebody with the personality disorder of narcissism, or even a high end of the spectrum of the narcissistic characteristic, they are not going to go toe to toe with you. So if you're married to someone like this, if you're stuck in a relationship, like in a work environment or with a parent or somebody that you just can't get out of relationship, or you don't want to get out of relationship because you sincerely love them, here is the key. What you really need to do is see them through the lens of their redeemed true self, their true identity. See not how they act, as they act in this very, kind of outlandish, intense way when they attack you or self-deprecate. Don't see them through that lens, but through the lens of their redeemed qualities, the qualities inside them that you think they're actually on this earth to exude, even if they never act like that. See them through that lens. You got to get a picture of it in your mind, have a vision for what that looks like for them. Set that in your mind, feel some positive feelings in your heart toward them, and then practice meditating on that. Even make a list of the characteristics of who they are in their truest self, and meditate on that. Hold space with it. And do it on the daily, do it on a regular basis, so that you build neural pathways around it. So when they start to act out in this intense way, you actually, instead of, it's almost like you see the vision come into your eyes, like they're acting like this, but I'm going to let myself see them like this. And then begin to respond to them out of that. What you don't want to do is criticize who they are. You don't want to say, you are so blank and blank, right? You're so arrogant. You're such a jerk. You're so, call names and come out like that. What you want to do is you want to kind of sandwich the experience with love, because remember, there's a depth of insecurity to narcissism. So someone who is narcissistic actually can't stand themselves. They hate themselves. There's deep, deep, deep self-hatred and insecurity. So they can't manage any feedback. So the best way to go about it is to sandwich it in between sincere, loving, heartfelt, authentic, genuine words of love, and seeing them through the lens of their redeemed self. To be able to say, listen, I love you. I want relationship with you. You matter to me. I see that you're actually an amazing person with these characteristics of, giving back to the world and being kind and compassionate. And you're so gifted and talented in these ways. And when you act like this, not when you are like this, but when you act like this, when your behavior is like this, when you look down at me, when you talk to me like this is how it affects me. It really hurts. And I really need you to stop, because it's not helping us. And then you put the end of the sandwich back on and you say, and I really want to do this with you. I really want to be in relationship because you matter to me. You're a person worthy of love and belonging, and I want to do this with you. So please, let's look at this together. And so what we've found is the sandwich can really help someone who's in this state of living in deep insecurity and masking it with these narcissistic characteristics to really be able to manage the input and possibly move towards some change, which would be amazing, right? And so what we know is that when you do this consistently over time, which can be exhausting, that's why you have to build up your own strength, your own resilience, your own confidence. When you are doing this with someone over time, giving them this healthy feedback and seeing them through the lens of their truest self, they are going to either change or they'll be the one to leave. And that would be sad, but the hope is that they would actually change, and that you would have done something that would really help them to become their best self. So please subscribe to our channel. We would love to see you on the next episode where we cover this and more in detail.